All right, so we got insider risk management sort of set up. You watched the last video. We've kind of got some settings configured, but now we want to go into the insider risk admin center inside of Purview and kind of walk through that and kind of get a feeling for what's there, how we might configure a few additional things. Where do we find alerts? Any activity that's been detected? Where's that found? So we're going to walk through that today, and that's going to be our focus. In our next video, we'll dive into actual creating policies and getting into some cases and so forth, and really getting into using insider risk management at that level. But let's just continue to get a little bit of an overview and get familiar with the admin center and what's there, some of the reporting and so forth. And so that's what we're going to do today. And that's going to be our focus is part 2, insider risk management, a little tour of the admin center. So let's get started. All right, continuing on with our video series, Insider Risk Management. The last video that we did, we kind of talked about some of the settings. We didn't go to everything, but we sort of covered a lot of the things that I would consider turning on and configuring when you're setting up Insider Risk Management. This time I just want to walk through a little bit more of what we might look at when we go into insider risk management, not in the settings, but actual admin center for the insider risk management. And so we'll walk through that now. So here we are in purview.microsoft.com, and we're going to go to solutions here. We go down here to insider risk management is what we're looking for. So when we go to insider risk management, we're going to come up with this overview. And this overview is going to give us some top recommended actions. So these are number 1. And right, we talked about turning on analytics during our setup video. We talked about turning on the analytics so that the insider risk can, scan the environment, scan users, etc. Get to know insider risk management. So this is just some guides. And just things that we should know about, like policies, risk scores, triggering, the indicators used by policy to detect specific activities, right? So when we talk about indicators, that's a key thing there. Indicators is what are we looking for? What is the specific activity that we're looking for? And so a lot of good information here. Then we've got configure insider risk settings, and these are just some things here. Now we talked about the settings that we did in the settings, but this is a little bit different. So it talks about indicators are essential for the activities you want to detect from your users, like downloading content from SharePoint, copying files over to USB. Indicators you choose will be available when you create a policy. We're going to talk about policies probably in our next video when we talk about policies and cases and really get down to it. But at a minimum, recommend setting office indicators relevant to your organization and risk score boosters. And we can click here and go and choose indicators. We'll take a look at that in a second. And then any alerts across the organization when a new policy generates its first alert. We'll kind of talk about some of the alert stuff. When a new high severity alerts are generated, and weekly emails summarizing the policies that have some unresolved warnings. And so we can go in and manage those there. We'll jump back to that in just a second. And then create your first policy. We can go in and create a first policy. We created a policy. We'll take a look at those policies here. Probably in the next video. We'll look at what we have, but we'll dive into that in a little more detail later. Make sure your team can get their jobs done. This is a required. By the way, these last three here are really required. Um, and so this here is just setting up to make sure the role groups are correct, make sure that the right people can do the right thing under the principle of least privilege. And so, um, uh, yeah, so anyway, so different role groups to assign here. Some good information. We can mark this as complete right now. As we go down here, we can see that we have 3 total alerts. We have 3 users being evaluated, so 3 users are in some risk level. It's a smaller environment, so I wouldn't expect to be too much there, but we'll take a look at that. Okay, so that's some of the overview areas. We'll go to the recommendations. We're going to see a lot of the similar things as far as turn on the analytics, get to know insider risk, right? These are all recommendations, and so they're all completed. And then we've got some different actions, review users who activity is being scored, review alerts, investigate a case, and then fine tune some detection. So these are just some things we want to look at. It gives you an estimated time to complete. And detect activity from priority physical access. Make sure that your policies cover all users. So if we click in here, we'll look at the policies, and it kind of drills us right into it. So good information there. As far as the reports go, we can look at some of those reports. Not a whole lot going on here, but we can go back 90 days here, and we can take a look at some of the reports, as well as some of the results from last scan activities. So 50% of your users perform some exfiltration activities, or which basically means there's some data leak going on. Not to be not unexpected by any means in my environment. Any cases that we have going on, we will talk about cases, but we're not getting into them right now. But we will definitely get into cases when we talk about insider risk policies and so forth. And user activity, so we can drill into some user activity reports. I can pop into here. I think I may have generated this report last month, 3 months, 6 months, user activity. And this is just kind of, it's really kind of interesting. So this is just kind of a heat map of the user's activities, right? So communication risk, deletion, infiltration, so bringing data in, exfiltration, bringing data, moving data out. We can really zero into a lot of the activities. It's really pretty interesting and pretty detailed. Let's go back 6 months to see what we got here. So, yeah, there we go. A lot going on here. So we can drill into these, what the date was, item selected, all of that. So it's really pretty interesting there. So that is our reports. We can go into audit log and see what was done and who did what. So if I said, marked this as complete, so I marked get to know insider risk management action as complete. Just kind of keeps an admin log of what's happened, who's done what, who's created a policy, who's changed what. So it's a audit log of sorts there. Then we get into policies. Now we're not going to go into policies right now, but these are basically some policies that we have. We go in here, we can create different policies. And these policies is really where we get this is really the crux of where it's at. So if we go into policies and we look, I think it's the default policy, adaptive protection policy for insider risk management. We go in here to look at, it's not generating anything due to event thresholds. So it's saying maybe you should add the policy, maybe edit those thresholds. But here's, we can add more indicators. Remember, the indicators is what is the activity that's being monitored, what's considered a hit. Policy setting, we can go in and look at the different policies here. And then the scope of users, include all users in group, recommended for best coverage, but this particular policy. So, but we're going to go into policies in more detail at a later date. But right now, that's just kind of what we have going on there from a policy standpoint. So yeah, we'll dive into that in more detail. In more detail later. So anyway, okay, then we can go into users, and this is where we can go into alerts. And this is where we can drill into, this needs review. We can drill into this alert and say, should be able to go into alert. Yep, we're going to the alert and see, should give us some detail. AI usage sensitive response received from Copilot. And so it was looking for some medical terms, etc. So we can really dive into this a whole lot to see exactly what was going on here. What might be considered, insider risk management, malicious data leak. That's the policy that was a hit, and so we can dive into that and alerts. Cases. We'll talk about cases here, but this is kind of when we start escalating things, and so forth. And so we'll get into cases later. Same thing with users. If you've got users that are at a risk level, insider risk level severity, here's that same policy that we saw earlier. We can dive into some of the what's causing some of the risk. Here's the activities. We can drill into these activities. Here's all the activity that have generated this risk. So we'll talk about that. We did talk about adaptive protection. We did our series on adaptive protection. So this is where you can go in. It's highly integrated and pretty tightly coupled with insider risk management. That's why it's here. So the adaptive protection gets its risk levels from insider risk, and so that's where we're at here. And so we can do, as we talked about, conditional access policies that say, hey, if you have this risk level based on your behavior, your activities, then we're going to crank up the conditional access policy. We're going to get to apply a policy that's tighter based on your level of risk. Same thing with data loss prevention, right? And so that we go into adaptive protection settings here. Forensic evidence, we're just not going to get a whole lot into. This is about machine. So investigating activity from the device level. So there's quite a bit to that. We're just not, and it's a capacity billing. So it's consumer based. So we're really not going to get too much into this one throughout this course. And so then, of course, we can notification templates when somebody is in violation or is at risk or whatever. We can do some notification templates to send, to message them, and we can do some custom templates here, in some communication to that regard. Finally, we can get into agents. We can do some insider risk if we have agents that are also violating, much like a user might. We won't get a ton into that, but as we move forward, we're going to really mostly focus on creating policies, adaptive policies, how it works together with other things, and also how we can kind of manage those activities that come into insider risk. So that is kind of our walkthrough of the insider risk admin center, if you will. And so up next, we're probably going to get into more of the policy side of it and kind of the nuts and bolts and how it works and how we can get it configured for your environment. So I hope this has been helpful, and thanks for watching.